The worst flooding in Cedar Creek Estate's history started with a pair of garden shears and an HOA board member who thought brown grass in winter was a violation worthy of immediate correction. Looking back, I should have known Margaret Whitmore would escalate things after our confrontation at the winter board meeting, but I never imagined she'd take matters into her own hands, or that her vandalism would end up flooding half the neighborhood and exposing years of illegal construction that would make national news. I'd lived in Cedar Creek Estates for 5 peaceful years before Margaret moved in and immediately started campaigning for a spot on the HOA board. Our community sat on a series of gently rolling hills overlooking a protected wetland area, and most residents had chosen it specifically for the natural landscaping and wildlife. The previous board had always emphasized environmental responsibility in their guidelines, but Margaret had different ideas. This community has become far too lax about proper lawn maintenance, she declared at her first board meeting, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation filled with close-up photos of what she deemed inappropriate vegetation. According to her, native plants were weeds, and letting grass go dormant in winter was clear evidence of neglect. I probably should have kept my mouth shut, but as the neighborhood's only landscape architect, I couldn't help speaking up. Actually, I said, raising my hand, maintaining green grass year-round in our climate zone requires excessive watering that can damage the natural watershed the previous board specifically encouraged. Thank you for your input, Margaret cut me off, her smile sharp as a razor. But I believe my 3 decades as a real estate agent give me somewhat more expertise in property values than, what was it you do again? Garden design. Environmental landscape architecture, I corrected, and I'm currently consulting with the city on their sustainable water management project. That got some interested murmurs from the other residents. Margaret's smile tightened further. Well, isn't that nice? However, the HOA guidelines clearly state that all lawns must be maintained in a neat, green, and properly trimmed state year-round. Those guidelines were written in 1987, I pointed out, before we understood the environmental impact of. Next item on the agenda, Margaret announced, clicking to her next slide. But I could see the way her perfectly manicured nails clenched around her presentation remote. I'd committed the cardinal sin in her eyes, publicly challenging her authority. The next few months were a slow-motion war of escalating violations and passive-aggressive encounters. My winter-dormant Bermuda grass earned me weekly notices about dead lawn appearance. My native plant garden beds were cited for unauthorized wild vegetation. When I installed a rain barrel system, with full board approval, except for Margaret's dissenting vote, she reported me to the city for unauthorized water collection, even though the city itself had partially funded the installation through their sustainability program. I appealed each violation, bringing documentation from the city's environmental office, and even offering to give a presentation on sustainable landscaping at the next board meeting. The other board members seemed interested, but Margaret somehow always managed to have the topic tabled for more urgent matters. The situation came to a head in late January when my smart irrigation system alerted me to a sudden pressure drop in Zone 3. I was at my office, reviewing plans for the city's new watershed management project, when the notification popped up on my phone. Thinking it was a simple valve issue, I made a note to check it when I got home. What I found instead was Margaret standing in my side yard with a pair of garden shears, systematically cutting through my sprinkler system's main supply line. "What are you doing?" I shouted, rushing across the lawn. "Stop immediately." She straightened up, somehow managing to look down her nose at me despite being several inches shorter. "Enforcing HOA regulations," she said crisply. "Your system has been running outside approved hours. Because it's a smart system that adjusts to weather conditions." I snapped. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "You have no right to destroy private property. That line is connected to the main water supply." "I have every right," she sniffed, waving a paper at me. Article 7, Section 3 clearly states that the HOA can take corrective action for irrigation violations. I've documented 23 instances of your system running at unauthorized times. Those weren't unauthorized. They were optimized for minimal water usage. And corrective action means fines or citations, not vandalism. I moved closer, trying to see how much damage she'd done. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The ground around the cut line was already showing signs of saturation, water pooling much faster than it should have been. And Margaret had made her cuts at the bottom of one of Cedar Creek's signature rolling hills. A hill that backed up to 6 other properties. A hill that channeled directly into the protected wetland area. "Margaret," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice calm, "did you check the system pressure before cutting that line?" She rolled her eyes. "I don't need to check anything. I have documented violations," and a loud gurgling sound cut her off as water began spurting more forcefully from the severed line. The smart system had already shut down, but the main supply line was still under full city pressure. And thanks to Margaret's multiple cuts, that pressurized water was now shooting straight into the hillside's loose winter soil. "Call 911. I ordered, already dialing the city's emergency utilities number. "The hill is oversaturated. If it gives way." A deep rumbling sound interrupted me. We both turned to see a spiderweb of cracks appearing in the soil above the cut line. Margaret's face finally showed a flicker of concern. "That's not supposed to." The ground shifted beneath our feet, and a section of my side yard began to slump. It was small at first, just a gentle depression, but I knew what it meant. 5 years of studying the neighborhood's topography for my sustainable landscape designs had taught me exactly how water moved through these hills. "Get back," I yelled, grabbing Margaret's arm and pulling her toward the street. "The whole slope is compromised." We made it to the sidewalk just as the first major section of hillside gave way. The sound was like nothing I'd ever heard before. A wet, sucking slide followed by multiple sharp cracks as the shifting earth took out fence sections and small trees. Margaret's garden shears lay abandoned in what was rapidly becoming a muddy sinkhole. But the worst was yet to come. As emergency vehicles began arriving on the scene, none of us realized that Margaret's unauthorized landscaping project had just triggered a chain of events that would expose decades of covered-up construction issues, lead to a statewide investigation of real estate practices, and ultimately change how every HOA in the county operated. Exactly what he meant. Part of my job involves studying water flow patterns, and something was definitely off about how quickly the hillside was failing. "The soil composition is wrong," I said, pulling up some files on my phone. "According to the original development plans, this whole area should be sitting on clay-heavy soil that would slow water penetration. But it's acting more like someone replaced all the natural clay with quick-draining construction fill." The engineer finished my sentence. He turned to address the growing crowd of emergency personnel. "We need ground-penetrating radar out here now. Something's very wrong with this hillside structural composition." Margaret, who had been unusually quiet while giving her statement to the police, suddenly became very interested in leaving. "Well, I'm sure you professionals have everything under control," she said, edging toward her car. "I'll just—" "Mrs. Whitmore," called a voice from behind her. "I believe we need to continue our discussion about unauthorized excavation and water system tampering." It was the city's utilities supervisor, and she was holding a very official-looking tablet, particularly in light of what we've just discovered about the property records. Margaret's face went through several interesting color changes. "I'm sure I don't know anything about—" "Actually," interrupted another voice, "I think you know quite a bit about it." This came from Dennis Chun, a retired civil engineer who'd lived in Cedar Creek since the original development. He was carrying a large accordion file, including why certain geological surveys from 1987 mysteriously disappeared from the county records. He added, "The next revelation hit like a second mudslide. It turned out that Margaret's crusade against my sustainable landscaping wasn't just about grass aesthetics. She had been one of the real estate agents involved in Cedar Creek's original development, and one of the people who had helped cover up some very questionable construction practices. They cut every corner they could," Dennis explained to the assembled crowd of residents and officials. "Used cheap fill instead of proper soil engineering. Skipped critical drainage systems. Falsified geological reports. I tried to report it back then, but suddenly my concerns were lost in the system. And the agent handling my complaint." He paused, looking directly at Margaret. "Margaret Whitmore." The ground-penetrating radar confirmed everything. The entire hillside had been improperly engineered, with crucial drainage and soil stability measures either missing or incorrectly installed. The developers had saved millions by cutting corners, then covered it up with falsified documents. And Margaret, along with several other real estate agents, had helped bury complaints from buyers who noticed problems. That's why she was so desperate to prevent any sustainable landscaping initiatives, I realized. Modern drainage systems and native plants would have eventually exposed the soil engineering issues. She wasn't protecting property values. She was protecting herself. The investigation that followed would take months to complete, but its effects were immediate and far-reaching. The city launched a full audit of every development Margaret had been involved with over her 30-year career. The state real estate board suspended her license pending a complete investigation. And the HOA? Well, it underwent some pretty dramatic changes. We're implementing a complete overhaul of our landscaping guidelines, announced our new board president, Dennis Chun, at an emergency community meeting. Ms. Kumar here has agreed to chair our new Environmental Compliance Committee and help bring our policies into the 21st century. The changes didn't stop there. The city used Cedar Creek as a test case for its new Sustainable Development Guidelines. My rain barrel system became a model for their residential water management program. And those native plant gardens Margaret had tried to have removed? They're now part of a countywide initiative to restore natural watersheds. Margaret put her house on the market 2 weeks after the mudslide, but she had trouble finding a buyer. Turns out people aren't eager to purchase property from someone featured in a viral video cutting sprinkler lines and triggering a landslide. The fact that she was now the star witness in a major construction fraud investigation didn't help either. The last time anyone saw her, she was supervising movers while a team of geologists conducted soil stability tests on her property. The tests revealed significant issues that would need to be disclosed to any potential buyers. Somehow, none of us were surprised when the moving truck headed toward a different state entirely. My smart irrigation system has been fully repaired and upgraded, now serving as a monitoring station for the city's watershed management program. The hillside has been properly re-engineered, with native plants and appropriate drainage systems installed according to current environmental standards. It actually looks better than before, though the security cameras I installed to prevent any future HOA enforcement actions do somewhat spoil the natural aesthetic. We still have an HOA, of course, but our meetings now focus on genuine community improvement rather than grass color enforcement. Dennis started a monthly educational series where residents can learn about sustainable home maintenance practices. Our community newsletter features tips on water conservation and native gardening, instead of violation notices. And that section of hillside where Margaret made her last stand against sustainable landscaping? It's now home to a demonstration garden showcasing drought-resistant plants and modern irrigation techniques. The educational plaque includes a QR code linking to a video about the importance of proper soil engineering and the dangers of tampering with water systems. Some say you can still find pieces of Margaret's garden shears buried in the dirt, but that's probably just an urban legend. Though I do make sure to check my irrigation system security footage every morning just in case. In this line of work, you can never be too careful about vengeful HOA board members with gardening tools.